Right, the last time we talked about the Vulcan 800, this time it's the V-Star 1100. Never mind the mess, it's giving me grief, but since I had some, comments here and there regarding the last buyer's guide, I thought, why the hell not? So yeah, this is the V-Star 1100. This is a classic version, as you can tell by looking at the big fender on the back, the big fender on the front. There's also a custom which has a narrow front wheel and slightly different rear fender. But the point is, this is the V-Star 1100. Now this has begun its life as the Virago 750 and 920 in 1981. Believe it or not, it's exactly the same engine, obviously with a few facelifts and updates. Now, since this one has a disc brake on the back and it has bigger wheels, fatter tire and wider rims, the gearbox is not exactly the same. Obviously, since it's an 1100, it is essentially a Virago 1100 reworked somewhat. Now, since this is a Virago engine, it is a very overbuilt and very low tech and old design sort of thing, because it has huge roller bearings on the crank, and instead of obviously plain bearings which require high oil pressure, this system has a low pressure high volume oil pump. So yeah, it is a very durable system in that regard. It's the same bore and stroke as the Virago 1100. Even the specs are pretty much the same. 60 something horsepower, 63 or something like that, and about 85 newton meters of torque. Again, that is about 60 something foot-pounds if you're an American. So yeah, same sort of thing, same figures, but this bike is a little bit heavier, of course, because of all the dress-up things, as you can see, with the fork shrouds and a different frame, of course, because this one has a tubular frame and the classic cradle, double cradle, dual cradle. I don't know how to say it, but you have two down tubes, one on each side of the engine block, instead of the good old-fashioned Virago system where you have a backbone and the engine is just a stressed member. So yeah, this is a considerably heavier bike. It's almost 70 kilos heavier, which is about 150 pounds. With the same sort of power as the Virago 1100, I should add. So yeah, performance-wise, it's not the briskest thing out there. Now, like I said, this is a very durable engine, but it's not without its faults. But let's go with the good things for starters. It has dual discs, as you can see, so it has a decent braking performance. It has two pots on either side, and if you pick the right brake pads, this is a really effective brake on the front. The rear, unlike the Virago, is already upgraded because it is a disc. So yeah, it's disc brake in the back. So this is the V-Star 1100. It has the same clutch and the same pretty much everything as the Virago, including the oil filter, which is one of the annoying things when it comes to this bike, because the oil filter is down there, just like on a Virago, and you have to remove the fucking exhaust because it's in the way. So even as an easy maintenance job, you have to remove the exhaust to gain access to the oil filter cap. Now, this being an old-fashioned bike with old-fashioned technology, it needs a bit more maintenance, a bit more frequent valve clearance checks. 4,000 miles or 6,000 kilometers. That's the recommendation. It uses the good old-fashioned plugs, the large ones, the ones that require a big 21 millimeter spark plug key. So yeah, this is a really old-fashioned design. So yeah, it has roller bearings. It has dual carbs, which means it needs to be synced every, let's say, a couple of years. and because of dual carbs, well, this is a late carb model. It came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that means this is very lean as far as the jetting is concerned. So it is rather picky when it comes to air filters and just things like the rubber elbows on the airbox. If one of the little clamps is a little bit loose, it is going to cough, it is going to pop and backfire. It is very, very sensitive to all sorts of air-fuel ratio changes. So yeah, be careful with that. The other thing that this bike is really infamous for is the starter clutch, because Yamaha did not really nail that this time either. Now, unlike the Viragos where they had a Bendix solenoid, this one has no Bendix solenoid. The starter is on the same place though as on the 750 and 920 Viragos, but this one has a starter clutch behind the flywheel, a one-way bearing, a sprag clutch, shall we say. So instead of moving gears like on the Viragos, this one has a starter clutch which is weak and it can break easily. And Yamaha said that, oh, it's not our responsibility, it's user error every single time when that fails, yada yada yada, because you shouldn't start the bike with the throttle open partially or whatever. Just use the choke with no throttle whatsoever, because if you start it up with a throttle partially open, then you put a lot of unnecessary stress on the starter clutch and it can break. Yeah, bullshit. There are upgraded versions on eBay, for example, heavy-duty starter clutches, where you can see even on the pictures that the little sprags that hold on to the gear are much wider with a bigger contact surface, so they last a bit longer, of course. So they're more of a heavy-duty sort of thing. So yeah, that is something to be aware of. Now, the other thing that is also a common failure on these bikes is the middle drive situation, which is right here. So behind the engine, where you have the U-joint, in there behind that, or under that rubber johnny, there is the universal joint. That is, yeah, there it is. There's your universal joint. That is where the gearbox, the output shaft on the gearbox, connects to the drive shaft, which runs along there. And that has a tendency to fall apart. Actually, what you have is the output shaft that has a little threaded section on the end, and that threaded section holds the front end of the U-joint in place with a nut. But if that nut, well, that nut normally is just tightened down on it to a certain point, because that is also a set screw. The gearbox shaft that comes that way and connects to the U-joint has the gear on the inside end, and by tightening the nut, you're pulling the shaft forward and making the gear lash smaller or larger between the output gear and the other bevel gear. And yeah, that can be messed up. Now the thing is, they torque it down until the gear lash is correct, and then they stake the nut. Sometimes, however, they fuck up the staking and the nut can come loose. And if it comes loose in the rotating U-joint, you know, that little Y-shaped or slingshot-shaped sort of thing, that nut can get jammed and it will break the shaft or the end of the shaft off. And that can be a really nasty and expensive job to fix. Now, obviously, there are different redneck fixes, shall we say, where people just weld on, you know, they just pull everything apart and they weld the U-joint back onto the shaft directly and be done with it. Others just drill and tap the broken end of the gearbox's, the bevel gear's output shaft, and they put a bolt into it once it is drilled and tapped. So yeah, you can find those solutions also all over the internet, because they are fairly common, just like the problem is fairly common. It is much less common with the 1100 Viragos because for some reason they were made in Japan, these weren't. Now, the other thing that needs doing every now and then, especially because this, as you can see, it's an exposed shaft with one of these oil seals on it, and these oil seals can, see, there's already a gap. So yeah, they don't seal properly, and since the shaft just rotates inside that rubber thingy, that is going to wear the rubber out, so you need to replace that every now and then and make sure it is well greased. And every time when you replace the rear tire, or when you take it to the tire shop, you also have to dismount or unbolt the rear differential, shall we say, or the rear final drive section, and that is a good opportunity to take that cone off, that one, take that off and grease the splines properly on the drive shaft, front and back, and grease the inside of that rubber seal, because otherwise yours will end up like that. Yeah, it just rubs it open, and with heat and everything and friction, it just fucks it up. So yeah, these are the weak points of these bikes. Like I said, the carbs are really picky, and they are very sensitive. The starter clutch is fairly weak, but then again, you can fix it by purchasing a heavy-duty upgraded starter clutch. And the other thing that you have to be aware of is the middle drive section with the knot and everything. So if you want to buy one of these, make sure that the starter clutch, when you start up the bike, is not noisy, it's not rattling, or there's no all sorts of metallic noises down there, there's no slippage. The same goes for the middle drive. When you try to buy one of these, or when you're negotiating and you take it for a test drive, try to listen to driveline noises. If you hear any whine on deceleration, or any sort of rattle, or just metallic creaky noises, especially on deceleration, then just walk away and leave that bike there, because that means the nut is already off, and maybe it is already broken as well. We don't know, because that would need a bit of a tear down. So you have to take this cover off, you have to take the plastic cover behind that off, and of course when that bolt gets loose and goes around in there, and the U-joint becomes loose and wobbles inside, it can grind down another expensive part, which is the speed sensor, because these bikes don't have cable driven speedos anymore, they are electronic, and there is the sensor and inside. So basically the U-joint has the pickup or the pulse wheel, and right next to it is the electronic sensor, and it's about a $200 thing. So yeah, be aware of these things. As far as the ride is concerned, the rear end or the rear suspension is quite stiff, the front is rather soft, so the same goes, just like with most Japanese cruisers. It could do with progressive springs and a better oil, and a slightly nicer rear suspension, like a Hagon or a YSS or progressive or something along those lines. Otherwise they are not bad, although I don't really like their performance, because like I said, it is essentially a Virago engine in an overweight body, and that engine power or that engine performance with such a weight, it's not ideal, at least not for me. As far as the fuel consumption is concerned, if you're American, for you, well, that's about the high 40s, low 40s, depending on how fast you go. For Europeans, it's about, well, with normal usage, backroad usage, legal speeds and such, it's about a 5-liter consumption per 100 kilometers. And if you try to go on motorways, then, doing 120, 130, which is 75, 80 miles per hour, the consumption can go up to as high as 7 liters per 100 kilometers, which is about 35 US mpg, if memory serves. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this is a very low-tech machine, which is easy to maintain, but it requires maintenance, and it has a few flaws that you should be aware of. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, don't subscribe, just try and use this information to your benefit. Cheerio.